everyone, and welcome to today's event, the road to COP26. What is the role of biofuels? My name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based in Brussels, and I'm coming at you from the heart of the EU Quarter at Euractiv's studios. Now, we're coming to you with this event at a time that's going to be really crucial for global climate policy. In a month and a half, we'll be having the long-awaited COP26 summit, the 26th Conference of the Parties meeting for the UN climate process. The reason that this installment is so particularly long-awaited is because it was delayed from last year due to the COVID pandemic. So really, we've got 2 years worth of work to do at this upcoming summit, and there will be a lot of issues to talk about at COP26. But one of the main ones will be how to tackle the thorny issue of global transport emissions. According to the International Energy Agency, transport accounts for 1/4 of all direct CO2 emissions from fuel combustion worldwide. Road vehicles are the source of nearly 3/4 of that amount. Now, biofuels hold a lot of promise to solve this conundrum because they are a fuel, but they're not from fossils. There have been a lot of lessons learned about biofuels over the past years, and one of the main places to learn those lessons is Brazil, the second largest producer of biofuels in the world, second only to the United States. Brazil has the largest fleet of flex fuel vehicles in the world, and for over 50 years now, cars in Brazil have been powered by sustainable biofuels. Now, the UK, which currently holds the rotating presidency for COP26, has set clean transport and electric vehicles as one of the priorities for this summit. The UK is investing in the electrification of its fleet and is moving from the E5 to the E10 standard, which has 10% bioethanol blend in petrol. So today we're going to talk about how biofuels will factor into this year's climate summit. We'll talk about issues like land use and sustainability issues, debates around food security, second generation and advanced biofuels, as well as voluntary certification and traceability within supply chains. We'll also talk about the use of biofuels in sectors that are harder to electrify, such as shipping and aviation. Now, before I introduce our panelists, a couple housekeeping notes. You guys will be able to put your questions to the panelists using Vimeo. You can do that using the chat feature. So we've changed the way we do questions. It's a little different than you might have done your active events before, but you want to ask your questions in the chat section. I'll be reading out those questions to the panelists. It would be great if in your question you can identify who you are, what your organization is, and if applicable, which specific panelist you'd like to put your questions to. So let me go ahead and introduce those panelists to you now. We have here with us today Plinio Nastari, President and CEO of DataGrow and President of the Brazilian Institute of Bioenergy and Bioeconomy. We have Emily Rees from UNICA, which is the Brazilian Sugarcane Industry Association. We have Andre Valente, Manager for Sustainability at the Brazilian energy company Raizen, and James Primrose, Vice President for Strategy at Gas and Low Carbon Energy at the British energy company BP. Thank you all for joining us today. Emily, I'd like to start with a question for you. As we're looking ahead to COP26, how do you think that summit is going to take into account the role of biofuels worldwide? What's going to be the place of biofuels at this summit?
Thanks, Dave, and a big thank you to Euractiv for convening this event today. I mean, I must say it's a pleasure to be amongst such esteemed panelists, and I'm really looking forward to learning a lot also out of today's discussion. So the British presidency of COP26 has set out its goals for Glasgow. It set out to secure this global net zero commitment by 2050. And essentially that means that countries are going to have to come forward with their ambitious 2030 emissions reduction targets. So when we look at decarbonising transport with that 2030 target in mind, one of the big hopes for COP26 is basically to convince international partners to make the move immediately towards sustainable solutions. And of course, low carbon fuels such as sugarcane ethanol, can save up to 90% of emissions in comparison to fossil fuels. And they're implementable today. So, I mean, really, there is no time to waste. Cars in most parts of the world support a minimum of 20% biofuels blends, again, with immediate effect. So what we have seen, and you mentioned it in the introduction, is that Brazilian sugarcane ethanol has really proven unambiguously the massive contribution that certain biofuels can make in the fight against climate change. And since 2003 and up to July of this year, thanks to that flex fuel technology that you mentioned, Brazil has saved over 560 million tons of CO2 from being emitted into the atmosphere. And just by way of comparison, that's at least 5 times the performance of the EU over the same period. So the International Energy Agency recently released a report on energy technology perspectives, and it shows that electrification alone cannot lead to climate neutrality, which is one of the goals for COP26, and that options such as renewable biofuels have to be part of the mix. Now, please don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to discount EVs. The world needs to look at every solution that's out there when we're looking at decarbonising transport. In Brazil, for instance, most of the large automakers are already looking at a number of solutions that also include hybrid electric ethanol and hydrogen ethanol solutions. But if the goal is to have the world switch entirely to electric vehicles, then surely countries are going to have clean energy matrices. Otherwise, you're simply dislocating your carbon emissions from transport to energy generation. So there really is a question there. I mean, in Brazil, sugarcane, and I think this is important to remind, it provides not only the ethanol, which is the renewable fuel for internal combustion engine passenger cars. Using flex fuel, the share can reach up to 100% ethanol, so be fossil fuel free. But it also supplies the bioelectricity that will and can move EVs. So in fact, today, sugarcane supplies enough energy, this bioelectricity, to power a country the size of Argentina or Norway. So it's also part of, let's say, the energy matrix that will move the EVs as well. So, but there is, of course, a question of affordability that I'm sure we'll be raising today. Additional COP objectives, if I may, are to curtail deforestation as one of the contributors to GHG emissions, to look at protecting natural habitats and restoring ecosystems, and importantly, to mobilize finance and investment, right, to make that big leap towards decarbonized economies. So I'm sure we'll touch upon those goals as part of our discussion today, and I'm really looking forward to the debate. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Emily. So you mentioned some of the experiences with Brazil. Plinio, let's turn to you next because you're really an expert on this. Tell us about the experience with biofuels in Brazil, the lessons learned, what's gone great, what's gone not great, and can Brazil's experience be scaled up to global level?
Thank you very much, Dave. I would like to compliment all panelists and thank for the invitation. Well, first of all, the relevance of Brazil's experience is that Brazil is the third largest consumer of fuels in transport in the world. And while being the third, ethanol, bioethanol, has been able to substitute 48% of gasoline consumption. This is data from 2019 and 2020. So by far, Brazil is the largest country in terms of ethanol use and also biodiesel use in proportionate terms, even though it's the second largest producer in volume. And the potential is not only where it lays. The residues from the industrialization of sugarcane, if they are used in biodigestion, which is a line of diversification which is just picking up right now, besides bioelectricity, biodigestion would allow production of 56 million cubic meters per day of biogas and biomethane. This is equivalent to 16.3% of electricity consumption in Brazil, or 30% of diesel consumption in Brazil, or 50% of natural gas, fossil natural gas consumption in Brazil. So it's an enormous amount of energy, basically because 1 ton of sugarcane is equivalent to 1.2 barrels of oil. And all this is being produced in a very sustainable way. The key to this whole process is certification. The certification, which is being achieved through very stringent, strong regulation, and in Brazil we have implemented RenovaBio, allows to guarantee that all this production is done in a sustainable way. The advantages of ethanol are various, and we see a number of technologies in transport competing at the moment, and as Emily said, we are going to have a diversity of solutions. But the tendency of electrification should not be mistaken by the electric vehicle alone. You can have electrification using liquid fuels, in particular, the clean liquid fuels like biofuels and biogas and biomethane included. And ethanol in particular is a drop-in solution, since it does not require the building up of a new infrastructure for distribution. It uses the current infrastructure for liquid fuels. It enables immediate implementation and results. And very interestingly, it's replicable. There's no technical barrier for its implementation. It's scalable. It can start small and grow over time, including using available feedstocks and residues, including cellulosic residues for conversion into ethanol. It has very effective and proven environmental and health benefits. Ethanol does not produce fine particulate matter. It substitutes carcinogenic aromatics. Very important, it's affordable in price to consumers. So it's a technology which is able to be implemented and paid for by societies around the world, while creating jobs as well. And it allows automakers to meet the most restrictive emission limits. It's fine to see many countries and companies looking at reducing emissions from current transport from the range of 122 to 140 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilometer and reduce it to 92 using electrification with batteries. It's a great contribution. But using ethanol, flex engines in Brazil already enable emissions of 46 grams per kilometer. And hybrids, which are electric vehicles using ethanol, currently in Brazil are emitting 29. And they are going towards zero emissions. Why? Because from the production of more bioelectricity, from the production of biogas and biomethane, the tendency is for substitution of diesel, which is still used in planting, harvesting, and transport of cane, to be substituted by biomethane, which comes from cane itself. And in these numbers, we are not taking into account the carbon which is being stored in the soil from microbiological activity, which is eating up all these residues from the industrialization of cane and fixed carbon in the soil, working as a carbon sink. When these measures are taken into account, we could be very easily be saving more than 100% of the carbon emissions which are currently being emitted by gasoline emissions. So this is very sustainable, it's replicable, Other countries are pursuing the same strategy because they have availability of feedstocks to do that. And the fleets which are in place today, as Emily said, allow for up to 20% blend. And some countries like India are on the verge of implementing flex fleets like Brazil does. In Brazil, 85% of the fleet is already flex and capable of using pure ethanol. And other countries are seeking to follow the same route. Finally, ethanol and biomethane has a great and large amount of hydrogen. And Nissan in 2016 declared in Yokohama, Japan, that by having a distribution system to distribute ethanol, Brazil was able to resolve the hurdle of the hydrogen distribution system because it has already almost 42 fuel stations distributing ethanol, which is equivalent to distributing hydrogen. So as countries around the world are seeking to establish hydrogen, coming into the era of hydrogen through biofuels on a sustainable way with certification to certify that this is being done on a sustainable way, biofuels can play this role. And this is what I think Brazil can bring to Glasgow, the experience of biofuels, which is replicable, scalable, but must be certified in a proper way.
Thanks, Plinio. So you mentioned sustainability when it comes to sugarcane. So let's turn to our sustainability manager next. Andre, tell us a little bit about how sustainability has evolved in Brazil, both with the situation on the ground and also with certification, which Plinio mentioned.
Right. Okay. Hello, Dave. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here with you and this heavy group of panelists. I would say that there's a lot to talk about when it comes to sustainable practices in Brazilian agribusiness, and most people are not familiar with what actually happens down here. And I'll try not to repeat too much what Plinio already covered, but if you look back to what used to be common practices 30 to 40 years ago, and comparing to what we got in place today, it's like looking at those pictures of our family, grandparents, and having a hard time to imagine it was real. If you look at sugarcane and ethanol, the industry's growth did come with a price. You can imagine a large sugarcane field that had to be manually harvested as fast as possible under high temperatures. On top of that, to make the cutting process easier, the farmers would just burn the whole field to the ground to get rid of tops and leaves that were just slowing them down. So very little enforcement, challenging labor conditions, intense environmental impact from the burning, surrounding communities having to treat the ashes as a regular visitor in their houses. But it was crystal clear decades ago that when we were entitled to call ethanol renewable, but not necessarily sustainable back then. And then if you fast forward to our current reality, labor-intensive harvesting replaced by highly technological and mechanized processes, pre-harvest burning designed previously to get rid of waste biomass are now replaced by burn-free harvesting that actually preserves the same waste biomass to become a feedstock for more energy production. Most of that was possible through public policies that held companies accountable for their social and environmental impacts. For instance, Brazil has a very strict legal environment when it comes to labor conditions, but companies did their part as well. Field burning has been extinguished voluntarily by major players even before the mandatory deadline, simply because it didn't make any more sense to do that. And all of that becomes clear when you look at the credentials we've got today. Every market or company have their priority on sustainability requirements. Could be a minimum GHG reduction, land use change requirements, biodiversity conservation, soil management, social impact conditions, you name it. But the good news is that we meet them all. And to be honest, the stricter, the better to us, because, well, we supply to the EU, we supply to the US, to Japan, but we wouldn't access the EU without a recognized certificate. Our product would not be competitive in California without a low carbon footprint. We wouldn't enter Japanese market without satellite imagery confirming zero deforestation. So that's how committed we are in Brazil. And it's not a coincidence that Brazil has most of the Bom Sucro certified sugarcane in the world. And just one more comment, and I'll stop here. Brazil is the 5th largest country and easily among the top 10 in energy demand as a whole, not only for transport sector. We're almost the size of Europe. Plus, we have a road-based logistics, so you can imagine the fuel demand. And our sugarcane in Brazil is responsible for 18% of the total energy matrix, not electricity matrix, energy as a whole. So one might think, well, if you cover your country with sugarcane, that's easy. But what people don't know is that Brazilian territory is only 1% sugarcane. We are this sugar, biofuel, and biomass world superpower with only 1% of our territory dedicated for that crop. And we haven't even topped the potential for that 1% yet. So most importantly, it happens today, and that's the key message. Repeating on what Emily just said, it happens today with the highest sustainability standards. It's available in large scale for anyone to use. It's drop-in, and we've already started the next transformation, which we can discuss further on. But I believe this gives a broad view of the biofuel industry's impact and the importance of making sure it is properly placed in any decarbonization discussion.
Thanks a lot, Andre. Let's pivot to the UK now, the holder of the COP26 presidency. James, how do you see biofuels fitting into the UK's energy mix? And I wonder, how might biofuels fit into BP's net zero target for 2050, which of course mirrors the UK's net zero target for 2050?
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dave, and hello to everybody who's on this webinar. So what I'll try and do is give you a perspective from BP, so who's an investor not just in biofuels but broader across the low carbon energy mix. So we absolutely see biofuels as having a role to play in the decarbonisation of transport fuels. Not just today, but also in the long term. And I think with the biofuels' potential to decarbonise the hard to electrify parts of the transport sector. So I'm thinking here about aviation in particular, but also some elements of the heavy duty road transport sector and possibly marine. But what I would say is, and there is clearly going to be the need and indeed opportunity for what we see today in terms of the biofuel sector and the best performing parts of the biofuel sector, which we would consider Brazil as being one of the foremost proponents. There's going to be a need for that sector, an opportunity for it to evolve. And I think if we want to see the advanced technologies that we're going to need in the longer term, post 2030, going out to 2050 to meet the net zero ambitions, they have to be built on the foundations of what we see today in terms of the skill sets, the capabilities, the technologies, the assets, the resource base that we see today. So we do see, and Emily's mentioned electrification, and we do see for most markets, and I think the UK that is one of them, we do see electrification, do see EVs as being the primary means to decarbonise the passenger car fleet. Indeed, BP is investing in this, particularly in the UK, with BP Pulse, and more recently with our partnership with VW to install fast chargers. But I think nonetheless, even by 2030, still 90% of all kilometers driven by cars, trucks, buses will be using liquid fuels. So again, this just really emphasised the need in the short term for low carbon liquid solutions, where biofuels in our view, have a very key role to play. And then, of course, there is the longer term requirement to pivot, if you will, away from biogasoline solutions into biodistillate, so biodiesel and biojet solutions. And again, just looking at the aviation sector, to meet the aviation goals by 2050, we may be looking at a requirement of some 30 to 50% biojet blends into aviation fuel. And that is, a considerable amount of volume of material, potentially equivalent to what we're seeing today in the biofuel sector as a whole. So, Dave, you asked about what BP is doing in this space and how this is influencing our strategy. Well, I think when we announced our new strategy back in September last year, I think we set out two relevant. Well, that strategy consisted of two relevant metrics. The first one was setting out a bioenergy target, and we've set a bioenergy target of 100,000 barrels a day of bioenergy by 2030. So that is a fourfold increase of where BP is today. And we also set out an ambition to be a leading marketer of biojet in our aviation business, and we set a target to capture 10% of the biojet market by 2030. And then, of course, there is our so-called AIMS 3 ambition, so our ambition to reduce the carbon intensity of our marketed products. And again, we see biofuels as being one of the core levers to achieve that going forward, both in the short term but also in the longer term. So in terms of our biofuel activities, so there is Brazil, and that's I suppose our key activity to date, and there's our joint venture with Bunge, so BP Bunge, which is one of the largest sugarcane ethanol operations in Brazil. So we have 11 mills, and we crush around about 32 million tons of sugarcane a year, producing some 1.7 billion litres of low-carbon ethanol, 1.7 million tons of sugar, and we also export power, green power, into the grid in 1.7 terawatt-hours a year. And the other three speakers have spoken to Brazil's sugarcane ethanol's sustainability and their carbon credentials. So I won't repeat those, but I mean, suffice to say, we regard Brazilian sugarcane ethanol as a biofuel of today, delivering advanced performance. Other activities that we are involved in is biogas, and we have a very large operation in the US, where we are the largest supplier of biogas to the transport sector in the US, targeting heavy duty vehicles, and we are investing again into that business in terms of supporting the supply offtakes with equity production in biogas, and we're looking at options and we're looking at supply positions in biogas, again targeting the heavy duty vehicles both in the UK and in Europe. On renewable diesel and biojet, we co-process waste oils at a number of our refineries to make renewable diesel and biojet, and we'll expand that going forward, potentially including large-scale dedicated facilities, and then in the advanced biojet sphere, if you will, there is our partnership with Fulcrum in the US, which is completing the construction of what will be the first commercial scale municipal solid waste to biojet using gasification Fischer-Tropsch in the world, and we will once that is commissioned, we will be taking some 50 million gallons a year of biojet and moving that into our aviation business. And we're looking at other options elsewhere, again in Europe. And the interesting piece there is some of the integration options we're seeing with green hydrogen. I mean, some people see e-fuels as being a counterpoint to advanced biofuels. Actually, we see quite some fairly interesting integration and synergy options with advanced biofuels and e-fuels. And then just a word on biojet. I mean, we were one of the first marketers of biojet, and we're one of the one particular milestone. We were the first supplier of biojet into an airport's hydrant system, so jet hydrant system in Oslo. And just more recently, in fact, this week we announced a partnership with BA to supply biojet SAF to all the planes that flying from Edinburgh and London into Glasgow for COP26. So what I would the closing point I would make is that going forward, we see the biofuel sector and the best performing parts of the biofuel sector having to go through two key pivots, if you will. Firstly, a move from what is today a biogasoline, bioethanol orientated market into biodistillate, and specifically into biojet, and then also a move into advanced low carbon feedstocks. Both reasons of sustainability, but also the scale and to deliver the material scale that we need to achieve if we're going to make the impact that we need. But again, I would reinforce the point that this has to be, if we're going to do this effectively, this has to be based on the foundations of what we have today. Again, in terms of the skill sets, the capabilities, the resources, the assets, and the business models and the value chains that we have today. I think it's a mistake to view advanced biofuels as somehow being a separate sector, a separate business. If it is to be successful, it will need to be deeply integrated with the business that we see today. And I think Brazil is a very good case in point. I mean, clearly there are a number of opportunities for Brazil to play its part in this big pivot, if you will. There are technologies that allow the conversion of biojet into bioethanol into biojet. There are the potential to use the waste feedstocks around the Brazilian sugarcane operations to produce advanced biofuels. And then, of course, there are all the skill sets and the capabilities and the experience that Brazil has of delivering bioenergy at scale. And again, I think it's difficult to underestimate that point, because it is scale that we're going to need if this is going to make a material impact.
Thanks, James. So I want to dive right in and ask about the elephant in the room, which is the twin issues of the food for fuel debate and the deforestation debate. There will obviously be people at COP26 who are not big fans of biofuels and who worry about the kind of side effects from indirect land use change and other economic effects that certainly here in Brussels have been a big concern. We know we've seen EU legislation around biofuels change several times because of some of these concerns. So Emily, let me put this question to you. Where are we right now with the food versus fuel debate and the deforestation debate?
Thanks. Great question, right? I mean, as you said, I don't think it should be the elephant in the room. But picking up the Financial Times yesterday, I couldn't help seeing that one of the articles was a diesel versus donuts dispute in the US. So perhaps it is a moment that we need to reflect on these issues. In Brazil, essentially, there is not an ILUC issue. I mean, even the European Union does very clearly accept that sugarcane ethanol is a low ILUC risk biofuel, right? We've had numerous reports, but one of the most recent ones from the Joint Research Center from the European Commission showed that the potential for expansion of sugarcane into croplands was marginal. And this is really simple. As Andre said, one is that sugarcane takes place in a bit over 1% of the Brazilian territory, right? But its expansion occurs in degraded pastures, right? And when we think of pastures, these aren't pretty grasslands as we'd find in Europe. They are unfortunately degraded pastures that are recuperated, which have whole new reforestation efforts that are brought into play in parallel to bringing these lands into a productive use. We also know that sugarcane ethanol, Brazilian sugarcane ethanol, respects every environmental criteria that is set out by the EU, which is why we welcome a certification process that would allow us to not have, let's say, this cap on feed and food-based biofuels that is currently in the Renewable Energy Directive. More importantly, I think that what we're seeing here is unfortunate is a misunderstanding of land use change in Brazil, particularly the fact that sugarcane is produced very far from the Amazon, 2,000 kilometers. It's more or less the distance of Paris to Moscow, with the rest that takes place in the northeast of Brazil. Essentially, also the producers have, as was mentioned already, under the RenovaBio program, in order to emit the carbon bonds, the CBIOs, producers have to respect a zero deforestation policy, which is audited independently. All of this essentially is why we have no issues, no qualms, I would say, with our sustainability references. We're very proud of the sustainability references that we can provide. But again, it means that the food versus fuel debate is very antiquated in our case. If we look towards Europe, we can also see, I was just seeing the Eurostat figures of today, which showed that the EU continues to be one of the major agricultural exporters of the world. And we see that also in Europe, the biofuel production of Europe doesn't seem to also have any strong impact on food markets. So I think that we need to look at each pathway in its own right and for its own criteria, sustainability criteria, in order to make that assessment. But it's certainly an issue that we hope to see addressed as part of COP26. Again, I think it's important to remind that sugarcane is really energy. It's pure energy in all its forms. It produces sugar, it produces renewable energy fuels, this low carbon fuel, ethanol. It also produces bioelectricity, biogas, and many other products downstream that also provide into the circular economy, such as bioplastics, for instance, which we need now to decarbonize our economies fully. So it's really that versatility that we need to assess within this framework. And I think that there are some debates that need to be put to rest, at least in the case of sugarcane ethanol, which once again is a proven low ILUC risk biofuel.
Andre, Emily says that she'd like to see this issue tackled head on at COP26. Do you think, Andre, that there is obviously when we're talking about different types of crops, they're all going to have different ILUC effects and different potential for deforestation or food versus fuel. So what would you like to see at the COP26 debate? And is there a risk that all of the different types of fuels, and we know there have been especially concerns about palm oil, you could name specific crops. Is there a risk that everyone just lumps first generation biofuels into one category and then the discussion becomes kind of polemic? And how at COP26 do you think it can be encouraged to go into the nuances of different types of biofuel?
Right, good question. I would say that this is one of the key challenges for us to talk about biofuels properly, because the big problem rests when you put every solution on the same basket, when you try to find a silver bullet that will cover everyone's challenges, and that's not the case. You need to, and perhaps COP could help us improve that, raise the bar on the level of the technical discussion. We need to take into account proper life cycle approaches to compare solutions. So there are crops that have full traceability of the actual geographical origin of where the feedstocks come from, which is the case for sugarcane. I don't know if many people know that, but once you harvest the sugarcane, you don't have much time until you actually crush and process it in the facility. So this would generate a logistics nightmare, but it's actually our free pass to sustainability, because I know exactly where it comes from. So I know I can give you the shape file of the actual farm and cross it with a satellite imagery from 20 years ago, and that's how we know that. Well, there is this scale point of view. So the whole 1% is very important, because how can something that occupies 1% be responsible for such large amount of deforestation? And there is a time frame point of view as well. This is a centuries old. There are several agricultural businesses that are centuries old practices. Raisin, we have currently 35, we don't even call it mills anymore. We call it bioenergy parks, because it has increased so much and improved so much in terms of energy outputs from the same feedstock. We have bioenergy parks that were actually built 100 years ago. So if we look back, like life cycle assessments point us to a 20-year time frame for assessment. If we look back 20 years ago, most of the sugarcane was already sugarcane back then, and the remaining part, that's what Emily covered, that went over mostly degraded pasture land, which occupies nearly 20 times more than sugarcane in Brazil in terms of territory. So what COP could help us is raising the bar and improving the level of discussion to take into account actual life cycle perspectives on each of the crops, each of the solutions. Not many people know that an electric vehicle today in some countries will have larger life cycle emissions than a gasoline regular vehicle, because of the energy matrix. There's no such thing as a zero emissions vehicle if we take into account life cycle perspective. So perhaps COP could help us improve the discussion.
Plinio, if you were at COP26 and you were talking to a policymaker who says, I don't know about biofuel, I've heard that it displaces food and causes deforestation, what would you say to that policymaker to reassure them specifically about the situation in Brazil?
Thank you, Dave. I would say that with certification, it's not only zero deforestation, but it's also recovery of ancillary forests around riverbanks. I'm going to give you a data. Between 1990 and 2016, in the Center-South region alone, 258,000 hectares of ancillary forests were recovered around riverbanks. That is about 3.3% of the current area cropped with sugarcane for sugar and ethanol. And we have been mentioning here that sugarcane occupies 1% of the territory, but it's 1% for the whole sugarcane. For ethanol, is a little bit over 0.5%. And with this 0.5%, Brazil is substituting almost 50% of its gasoline with a very clean fuel. And producing bioelectricity, producing pelletized bagasse, producing also second generation ethanol with trash from sugarcane, which is recovered from the field, producing now biogas and biomethane, all because sugarcane is a very efficient way of converting solar energy into biomass, and then biomass converted into usable, easy to store and distribute energy. Beyond the ancillary forests, over 8,400 water springs during the same period had been recovered and maintained and preserved. In the Northeast, if you go to Alagoas, 30% of the cane area in Alagoas is areas of protected land and ancillary forests around river banks. So when you fly over with a commercial plane, over these areas, it's a garden. And I would say this to this policymaker: if you really want to decarbonize the world, and you need to do this fast, there are few options at hand. And bioenergy and biofuels are probably the best way of doing it, if you consider well-to-wheel or cradle-to-grave criteria. If you want to mock yourself considering only tank-to-wheel, it's fine. You only look at tailpipe emissions and don't look at the source of the energy or how the energy is being produced, it's fine. But when you use the well-to-wheel or cradle-to-grave criteria, there's very little options that match bioenergy and biofuels. And that's why the IEA, along with IRENA, along with other 19 nations, in COP21, Fiji, in Bonn, issued a declaration of vision saying that for you to meet the Paris goal agreements, you need to double the proportion of bioenergy in world energy demand, and you need to triple the proportion of sustainable biofuels in fuels used in land, sea, and air. And I agree fully with James when he talks about the importance of SAF, sustainable aviation fuels. Ethanol is a great way of producing SAFs. And this is going to be very important as well, because we need to fulfill the goals of CORSIA for neutralization of emissions in the aviation sector, as well as we need to reduce emissions from sea transport using other biofuels. So biofuels is an easy way, using available feedstocks around the world. Let's forget the limitations of some countries in that regard. The world is larger than the limitations of a few countries. The world has a lot of feedstocks, which are essentially solar energy being captured as biomass, which is there available to be used. And Brazil is going to be very busy itself in meeting its own goals established for RenovaBio. RenovaBio targets, decarbonization targets, call for expansion of ethanol use from the current 30 billion liters to 48 billion liters in 10 years. And this is going to, I assure you, is going to be done on a sustainable way, all certified under international criteria. But other countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America can expand biofuel production and eventually increase world trade in biofuels.
Thanks. We have a lot of great questions coming in from the audience, but before I throw a couple of those out to you guys, I want to ask a question to James, and that is about the ETS. So we know that the UK is right now setting up their own emissions trading system following Brexit. We still don't really know the details of that, but we do have, of course, the EU ETS, which is now well established. What is the intersection between motivations in the ETS and biofuels? We know that the EU has proposed for this dedicated transport ETS. So how could the EU ETS, the UK ETS, other emissions trading systems around the world motivate the development of biofuel?
Okay, it's a very good question. I mean, up until, as you know, from a historical basis, road transport has been excluded from the EU ETS. But if we look at maybe analogous regulations, so we look at the Californian low carbon fuel standard regulation, which is a carbon mechanism dedicated for road transport, and the analogy in that the Renova Bio program that Emily has mentioned is another example. I mean, the Californian system has been very effective in applying a carbon price to biofuels and to differentiate biofuels based on their carbon credentials. And that is that's the right thing to do, we feel, and that's a very, very powerful mechanism. But I think, from my perspective, it's only half the story, if you will, because I think as well as incentivizing biofuels on a carbon basis, there needs to be a technology driver, something that forces new technologies and enables and accelerates the commercialization of new technologies and brings them down their cost curve. And again, if we're going back to the US, and that is and the federal renewable fuel standard, which does have that technology forcing element in its various sub-targets under the RFS. So the US renewable fuel standard, working in tandem with the California low carbon fuel standard, I think does provide that mechanism that I think is probably the preferred way forwards, which is in part providing or incentivizing established technologies based on their carbon credentials, but also providing that mechanism to accelerate new emerging technologies and get them into the market and start to propel them down the cost curve. And that should be the twin objectives, if you like, of biofuel regulation.
Okay, well, let's take a question from the audience here. We have a question from Mike from Transport and Environment. I'm going to put this question to Plinio. Mike says, as solar panels are 100 times more efficient in providing usable energy in transport, should solar panels gradually replace sugarcane to make much more efficient use of available land? So Plinio, do you know offhand how the energy generation potential of solar panels in a piece of land compares to sugarcane used for bioethanol? And then what do you think of this idea to gradually replace that use of the land?
No, we don't see that possible. And yes, solar panels have improved their efficiency tremendously over time, and probably will continue to do that. But the efficiency of sugarcane and other biomasses, I have to mention as well, 10% of ethanol in Brazil is produced from corn. Sustainably produced corn as second crop to soy, which uses very little inputs. It's very low cost, very efficient. These biomasses, cane, corn, they're very efficient in converting solar energy into biomass. And if you're able to convert this biomass efficiently into concentrated energy, be it liquid or bioelectricity or biogas, that becomes very interesting on an energy-wise perspective. When you look at solar panels or even wind generation, you have to take into account what is the carbon which is being emitted in producing and discarding these solar panels after they get their life cycle spent. And you have to take into account under the cradle-to-grave system as well, all the energy which is used in establishing the new distribution system to use this electricity. In many parts of the world, we don't have infrastructure to recharge batteries or have this electricity distributed in the necessary way. So yes, we believe that solar panels are going to be increasingly used. I myself am a user of solar panel to substitute for home electricity, and I'm a fan of it. But when you look at the need to have energy for transport to be available for long-haul transport, in particular in large countries with a large geographical area, we still see a great role and great potential for liquid fuels, provided they are produced in a sustainable, certified way, like they are happening in Brazil and soon in many other parts of the world.
Thanks a lot. So we have a question next from Kaya Grotheim, who is a counselor for environment. I'm going to put this question to Emily, but Emily, let me know if you think someone else is better for this. Kaya asks, what about pesticides used to produce biofuels in Brazil and their effect on biodiversity?
So perhaps I can leave the specifics of that to Plinio, but my understanding is that we are talking about a very low use of pesticides in any production of sugarcane ethanol or sugarcane production in Brazil. Plinio?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
If you don't mind, Dave, most of biological control in Brazil is using a fly, and the biggest pest we have in sugarcane is a worm called broca, and this worm is fought with this fly. So it's very common in Brazil, biological control. Of course, there are companies that still use pesticides, chemical pesticides, but the amount of pesticide which is used compared with other crops is very low. Per hectare basis, it's 1/4 to 1/5 of what is being used in other crops in Brazil and in other countries around the world.
So the next question comes from Enrique Antunes from BP. I want to put this to Andre. So Enrique asks, biofuels have been out there for quite a long time now. What's stopping it? And I think by it he means the wide-scale deployment of biofuels. And what can be done to achieve global large scale in terms of supply and demand? Andre?
Thanks. Well, I would say that the usage of biofuels will be proportional to carbon pricing mechanisms that are put in place worldwide speaking. I mean, the main advantage of a biofuel is the fact that it displaces a large amount of CO2 from the atmosphere by avoiding the usage of a fossil equivalent. If this CO2 spread is not properly priced, then it's like you have a free negative externality to emit from a user perspective, and there's no incentive for you to boost biofuel production. So I would say that there are several successful cases of implementing carbon pricing mechanisms, and whenever you price carbon, you're going to price the largest emitter sector, and mostly transportation is among them. So that's why you have RenovaBio in Brazil, the LCFS in California, and several other good mechanisms. So as the more such practices grow, I would say that it is what we need to unlock a global, larger scale of biofuels, and this will be just automatic because market will regulate itself, and if you go for the cheapest CO2 reduction, if it's a free market in which you just reach out for the most feasible solution, you can rest assured that biofuels will be there, because as we've been saying throughout the conversation here, this is you're left out with not many alternatives when you want to abate emissions quickly.
Okay, so we have a next question here. I'm going to put this question to James. James, this question is from Frank Rosillo-Calle from Imperial College. Frank says, biofuels cannot replace all petrol in transport. Should we give priority to niche markets like aviation, maritime, and fine chemicals? We haven't really touched on, we've been talking, I think, mostly about automotive uses. Do you think that rather the focus should be more on these other uses of transport which have been harder to decarbonize and would certainly be hard to electrify?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. So I'll maybe push back slightly on the description of aviation as niche, because I think in the longer term, the requirements for SAF, or sustainable aviation fuel, for biojets are going to be significant. And I've mentioned this potential 50% of the aviation biofuel by 2050, and that's out of total global jet consumption of some 6 million barrels a day. Today, maybe falling slightly, maybe to 5. So you can see 50% of that sort of consumption pool is very far from being niche, and as I said, very equivalent to today's total biofuels supply. And as I said out front, I think about this as an evolution, and the biofuel sector, I think, needs to go through an evolution on this pivot from what is some 70% of overall global biofuel production is bioethanol, and the reason for that is the most cost-effective technology that we have today. But I think as technologies evolve, and as the need for action to evolve, and also the regulation that's required to support that, and I'm thinking particularly of specific biojet targets to propel the development of that market. We'll see the evolution in biofuels, as I said, from what is today primary biogasoline solutions into biodistillate, biojet, biodiesel solutions, targeting very much the parts of the transport sector where electrification is going to be is not necessarily going to be the advantaged option. And again, to reinforce my point is, in order to do that, we are going to need and evolve off the basis that we have today.
Does anyone else want to come in on this issue of using biofuels in aviation and or maritime?
I'd like to say a few words about it, Dave. We are not mentioning the use of CO2 from fermentation, but this is a great potential because in fermentation tanks producing ethanol, there's the release of CO2, which is reabsorbed by the sugarcane, but you can capture this CO2 and actually use it to produce chemicals, green chemicals, combining ethanol and biogas and CO2 to produce a green chemistry. And this allows not only to produce sustainable aviation fuels, but a number of other products. So there's a huge potential in that area. And yes, I see a great potential for ethanol used in aviation. And this may be a great line of development, including the use of CO2 from fermentation tanks, which is, by the way, very clean CO2, which makes it easier to be used in this transformation.
Thanks. So, Emily, did you want to come in?
Yeah, very quickly on the SAF, I think one of the key elements here is that farnesene, so this is the sustainable aviation fuel that's based from sugarcane ethanol. In particular, farnesene has been already recognized internationally as one of the key pathways that needs to be developed. And obviously, there needs to be a lot of investment into bringing this to a certain scalability. But what we've seen now is from the EU's proposal, and this is where we need a bit more policy coherence between different levels of governance, especially going into COP26, is that we've seen that there is a sort of this exclusion of a number of these pathways, these feed crop pathways, simply on the basis of the fact that they are food or feed based rather than their sustainability criteria. So once again, it would be important to have this coherence between what is being developed at the level in Corsia, what is discussed in COP, and what is discussed in Brussels.
Thanks. Okay, so we're wrapping up toward the end of the event, so I thought it might be interesting to get some closing remarks from each of you, kind of what your key takeaways from this conversation are, and what you think is going to be the most interesting to watch at the COP26 in Glasgow. James, let's start with you. What are your key takeaways from today's conversation?
Well, I suppose my key takeaways are, as I said, for me personally, very much a conviction that bioenergy, biofuels has a role to play going forward in the energy mix. And as I mentioned, tackling in the longer term parts of the transport sector that are going to be hard to decarbonise, that's where electrification is not really an option, and the really sort of critical role that biofuels have in that space, and to some extent the challenge. I've already given you some idea of the potential requirements for biojet going forward, and for me it's clear that this is not going to be just one technology, one biopathway that is going to deliver this. So, for example, we don't see municipal solid waste and fischer-tropsch gasification as being the sole solution. It will be part of the solution. There will need to be other technologies, other feedstocks. So yes, there's alcohol to jet technologies, and we see very much Brazil as having a role to play in that. But we're going to have to go beyond that in terms of other technologies, looking at other energy crops, fast-growing energy grasses, other residues and wastes, other conversion technologies. So this is really going to be a very significant challenge, and it's going to involve, and is actually quite a compelling challenge in terms of the range of technologies that we're going to need, and indeed the deployment of new businesses, new value chains, and that is going to take regulation to enable, to support, and I think what I would and with maybe the sort of specific reference to the UK, and maybe looking at another sector, we've seen the success that the UK has had in achieving and in promoting offshore wind, and moving the UK to being one of the leaders in the offshore wind sector. And that was as a result of some very foresighted policy making some 5 years ago by the government, 5 more years ago, and the putting in place of the necessary regulation that gave the sector the confidence to invest, and you saw the result in terms of offshore wind coming down its cost curve from being well over 100 pounds per megawatt hour to now being the most cost-effective form of new build power generation in the UK, and indeed in other markets. So that gives you a very clear example of what is possible if you get the policy and the regulation right. And I think that would be my message to COP26 is, be ambitious and get the policy and regulation right, and then you will establish the new businesses and new business models that you're looking for.
Thanks. Andre, let's get your quick takeaways from today's discussion.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'd like to congratulate you on promoting such an important debate. Sometimes what we lack the most is just information, right? Once we get everyone's attention to the fact that whatever the solution for decarbonization is, it has to leave passion and personal beliefs behind and take into account an evidence-based approach and search for the proper combination of low carbon solutions. It's not like one or another it's going to be the only one. There's no silver bullet, and we'll only be able to choose the right path once we balance every options properly, taking into account all the impacts associated with each of them. So, well, Raizen makes itself available to discuss these alternatives, and we are confident that biofuels will remain playing a key role on decarbonization for energy sectors for a long time, as we do today. So thank you very much, and I make myself available for any further discussions.
Thanks a lot. Plinio, let's go to you next.
Thank you, Dave. Well, looking forward, I think policy should not look at taxonomy or labeling of options, but should look at the technical elements to define which should be the targets, and then not elect champions. Let the market and technology define which are going to be the best solutions. I think Brazil brings to COP Glasgow a great example with biofuels produced in a sustainable way, certified way. And I think this is going to be one of the options that will be on the table for energy in transport looking forward. And more and more information and knowledge about what is really happening is needed. It would be great if in Glasgow we change the additionality concept, which is preventing the international adoption of the carbon bond under RenovaBio to be adopted more easily, because it just doesn't make sense that it may not be considered just because ethanol has been in use in Brazil for decades, and you should consider what is the additional biofuel production which is being used in an effective way to mitigate emissions elsewhere. So this is what I think it's needed, and I appreciate the invitation, and anything that you need in terms of additional information, we will be available as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And finally, Emily, what are your quick takeaways from today?
Thank you, Dave. If you'll allow me, perhaps I'd address what we didn't discuss at length today, and maybe just touch upon that as a closing remark, which is finance and affordability. These are going to be two of the really top themes that we will be discussing in COP26 and that will make a difference, right? The COP presidency, the UK has already said that this is going to be one of the big goals. They estimate that we need around $100 billion per year to finance this transition, right? So the question of what are the appropriate structures to mobilize finance and investment are going to be key to some of these debates. And as Plinio just mentioned, the question of carbon bonds and the carbon bonds and how they can be exchanged, for instance, in the open financial market and amongst countries themselves are going to be obviously some of the questions that should be debated. And again, then the affordability in this transition, which we should look at. Perhaps, you know, when we're sitting here in Brussels, it's easy to forget that it's not all countries that will be able to benefit from the same level of subsidization as countries in the European Union to make these transitions. We do need to make pathways available for everyone in order to keep the 1.5 degree limit within reach. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you to all the panelists for some great insights, and thank you to you at home for following along. Certainly, there's a lot to do to prepare in the next month and a half for this really mammoth climate conference. And there's going to be a lot of different issues to discuss. Transport is really going to be at the front of the agenda. So thanks for following along. Euractiv will be continuing to cover this issue as we go forward and head toward COP26. So I wish you all a great rest of your day, and I encourage you to keep the conversation going about how biofuels can contribute to global efforts to fight climate change. Take care.